The Starlight Lounge shimmered like a jewel in the heart of New Singapore, its holographic facade shifting between constellations from 100 different worlds. James Morgan wiped down the crystalline bar top for the 10th time that evening, more from nervous habit than necessity. After 5 years serving drinks to every species in the Galactic Alliance, he thought he'd seen it all. Tonight would prove him wrong. The doors whispered open, admitting a tall figure who seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her skin was deep indigo, almost black, with tiny points of light scattered across it like stars in the night sky. James found himself holding his breath as she approached the bar, her movements precise and deliberate. "Welcome to Starlight," he managed, proud that his voice remained steady. "I'm James. What can I get you?" The visitor's eyes opened fully, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle, each one shifting through impossible colors like oil on water. "I am Lyra, xenobiochemist first class from the Nocturne Collective. I seek to understand human social customs through direct observation." James smiled, relaxing slightly. Scientists were usually easier to deal with than diplomats. "Well, you've come to the right place. This bar's been a cultural melting pot since first contact." "Fascinating." Lyra's middle eye focused on the array of bottles behind James while the other 2 studied his face. "Your species uses chemical stimulants as social lubricants. Most inefficient." "Maybe," James chuckled, "but we make up for it in style. Would you like to try something? I can adjust any drink to your biology." Lyra's eyes swirled with new colors. "That would be acceptable. For research purposes." James turned to his ingredients, mind already racing through possibilities. The Nocturne Collective was famous for their biotechnology, and infamous for their disdain for primitive species like humans. Having one of them show interest in Earth culture was unprecedented. As he mixed, he noticed Lyra taking samples of the air with a device embedded in her wrist. "Studying our pheromones?" he asked casually. "Among other things. Your species releases an extraordinary variety of chemical signals. Most are meaningless noise, but some." She paused, all 3 eyes focusing on him. "Some are intriguing." James finished the drink with a flourish, adding a splash of bioluminescent algae extract that made the liquid glow with shifting patterns of blue and purple. "I call this the cosmic dream. Perfectly safe for your physiology, and it should give you some interesting data for your research." Lyra accepted the drink with surprising grace, her fingers barely brushing his as she took the glass. The moment their skin touched, James felt a slight tingle, like static electricity. He dismissed it as nerves. The scientist raised the glass to eye level, all 3 organs analyzing its contents. "The aesthetic is pleasing," she admitted. "Though unnecessary. That's humanity for you. We like to make things beautiful, even if it serves no practical purpose." Lyra took a careful sip, and her eyes widened fractionally. The points of light across her skin brightened for a moment before dimming again. "The taste is complex. And the visual stimulation enhances the experience. Perhaps not entirely inefficient after all." As she continued to drink, James noticed subtle changes in her behavior. Her posture softened slightly, and her eyes seemed to linger on him longer than strictly necessary for scientific observation. He attributed it to the alcohol, carefully calibrated though it was for her system. "Tell me, James," she said, setting down the empty glass, "what other human customs could you demonstrate?" Before he could answer, a commotion near the door drew their attention. A group of corporate executives from Terra Prime Industries had arrived, their loud voices and expensive suits marking them as clearly as any alien features might. "Perhaps another time," Lyra said, standing smoothly. "I find I need to process this data. But I will return tomorrow. For further research." As she glided toward the exit, James couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. He had no idea how right he was. In her quarters aboard the Nocturne research vessel, Lyra stared at her test results in disbelief. The pheromone samples she'd collected from the bar showed something impossible. Her own biochemistry was beginning to shift, adapting to respond to human chemical signals. And at the center of it all was the bartender's unique signature, now permanently encoded in her sensory matrix. She should report this immediately to the collective. Such an unprecedented reaction could have serious diplomatic implications. Instead, she found herself planning tomorrow's research with unprecedented anticipation. The stars outside her window seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heart's, a new and dangerous emotion taking root in her carefully ordered mind. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The morning after her visit to Starlight Lounge, Lyra paced her laboratory aboard the nocturne vessel, her skin flickering with agitated patterns of light. The test results before her defied everything she knew about xenobiology. Her body wasn't just responding to human pheromones, it was actively synthesizing complementary chemicals. "Computer, run diagnostic sequence 17 again," she commanded, her 3 eyes fixed on the holographic display. The results remained unchanged, her biochemistry was transforming at the molecular level. Most alarming of all, her thoughts kept drifting to James. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The precise movements of his hands as he mixed drinks. The subtle variations in his voice when speaking to different customers. She was supposed to be studying human social customs, not becoming fascinated by one specific specimen. As evening approached, Lyra found herself back at the Starlight Lounge, drawn there by forces she couldn't, or wouldn't, fully analyze. James looked up as she entered, and the surge of chemicals her body produced at the sight of him made her sensory nodes tingle. "Welcome back," he said, smiling that irritatingly compelling smile. "Ready for more research?" "Indeed." She took her seat at the bar, noting how her body automatically oriented itself toward him. "Though I find my focus has shifted somewhat." James raised an eyebrow as he began preparing another drink. "Oh. How so?" "My initial mission was to study human social customs broadly. However, I find myself increasingly interested in specific aspects of human interaction. Particularly." She paused, her skin rippling with embarrassment, mating behaviors. The bottle in James's hand slipped slightly, but he recovered quickly. "That's, quite a shift in research focus. The Nocturne Collective considers human reproduction practices primitive and inefficient," Lyra continued, her middle eye fixed on James while the other two tracked his hands. "We have evolved beyond such physical interactions. And yet?" James prompted, sliding a new creation across the bar. This one shimmered with gold and silver sparkles. "I find myself experiencing unprecedented physiological responses. My biochemistry is adapting in ways that should be impossible." She took a sip of the drink, her skin lighting up with pleasure at the taste. "For instance, that simple action just released a cascade of neurotransmitters that mirror human responses to positive stimuli." James leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "Are you saying you're developing human-like reactions?" "More specifically, I'm developing reactions complementary to human biochemistry. Particularly." She hesitated again, all 3 eyes swirling with complex emotions, "particularly yours." The bar had grown quieter as the early evening crowd thinned out. In the relative privacy, James felt bold enough to ask, "Is that why you came back? To study these reactions?" "Partially," Lyra admitted. "But I find my scientific curiosity is becoming entangled with other motivations." She reached across the bar, her fingers brushing James's hand. The contact sent visible waves of light cascading across her skin. James stared at their touching hands, fascinated by the display. "That's beautiful," he murmured. "It is an involuntary response to emotional stimuli," Lyra explained, though she made no move to break the contact. "Among my people, such displays are considered embarrassing evidence of insufficient emotional control." "Well, I think it's amazing," James said softly. You're literally lighting up with happiness. Before Lyra could respond, her wrist device chimed urgently. Her skin darkened as she checked the message. The collective wishes to review my research progress. They must not know about these developments. My unauthorized biochemical adaptations would be considered a form of contamination. What will they do if they find out? James asked, concern evident in his voice. Best case scenario, immediate recall and intensive purification procedures. Worst case. She shuddered, her skin going almost completely dark, permanent quarantine to prevent the spread of primitive influences. James reached out instinctively to comfort her, then hesitated. Is it safe to touch you? I don't want to make things worse. Lyra's laugh held a note of hysteria. It's far too late for such precautions. My body has already adapted to crave your specific chemical signatures. Every moment in your presence reinforces the changes. She stood abruptly. I should go. I need to prepare a suitable report that omits these complications. Wait, James called as she turned to leave. When will I see you again? Lyra paused at the door, her skin pulsing with conflicting patterns. I should not return. It would be the logical choice. She turned back to face him, all three eyes glowing with determination. But I find myself increasingly skeptical of logic's supremacy. Tomorrow. After my report to the collective. As she disappeared into the night, James realized he was in dangerous territory. Interspecies relationships weren't technically forbidden, but a romance that could trigger a diplomatic incident with the Nocturne Collective? That was another matter entirely. Still, as he cleaned up for the night, he found himself planning tomorrow's special drink menu with unusual care. If Lyra was willing to risk everything to explore these new feelings, the least he could do was make sure she had the best possible experience. In her quarters, Lyra began composing her report, carefully documenting everything except the truth. As she worked, her skin continued to shimmer with thoughts of James, a visible reminder that she had passed the point of no return. Tomorrow would bring either disaster or discovery, and she found herself equally thrilled and terrified by either possibility. The Nocturne Collective's probe ship hung in low Earth orbit like a black pearl against the blue-white planet. In her presentation chamber, Lyra stood before the Council's holographic avatars, her skin carefully regulated to show no trace of the turmoil within. Your preliminary findings are interesting, First Observer Nexus stated, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight. Though your methods seem unusually immersive. Direct observation provides optimal data collection, Lyra responded, grateful that her voice remained steady. The human social behaviors are far more complex than our initial study suggested. Indeed. Second Observer Helix leaned forward, her crystalline form scattering light. We've detected significant changes in your biochemical patterns. Care to explain? Lyra's middle eye flickered briefly, a tell she immediately tried to suppress. Minor adaptations to facilitate research. Nothing that compromises my objectivity. See that it stays that way, Nexus warned. We wouldn't want to repeat the Proxima incident. The reference made Lyra's skin darken involuntarily. 50 years ago, a Nocturne researcher had gone native among the Proxima beings, leading to a diplomatic crisis that still affected relations between their species. You have one standard week to complete your observations, Helix announced. Then you will return for full decontamination and neural resequencing. The transmission ended, leaving Lyra alone with the weight of her deception. 1 week. 7 Earth days to either find a solution or say goodbye to everything she was discovering about herself, and James. At the Starlight Lounge, James was having problems of his own. Word had spread about the Nocturne scientists' regular visits, attracting unwanted attention. Tonight, a group of Terra Prime executives occupied a corner booth, their eyes constantly darting between him and the door. They're just curious, his co-worker Diane assured him as she collected glasses. It's not every day you see a Nocturne letting loose in a bar. That's what worries me, James muttered. The collective is famously private about their people and their technology. This kind of attention can't be good. The doors slid open, and Lyra entered. James immediately noticed something was wrong. Her usual fluid grace seemed forced, and her skin's natural starfield pattern was almost completely dark. "We need to talk," she said without preamble, her three eyes darting toward the Terra Prime group. "Somewhere private." James nodded to Diane, who smoothly took over the bar. He led Lyra to the staff lounge, engaging the privacy screen. The moment they were alone, Lyra's careful composure crumbled. "They know," she whispered, her skin flickering with distress. "Maybe not everything, but enough. They're recalling me in 1 week for neural resequencing. They'll erase everything I've become." Without thinking, James reached for her hand. The moment their skin touched, Lyra's pattern erupted in waves of light that seemed to chase each other across her body. Rather than pull away, she moved closer. "The changes are accelerating," she said, her voice a mix of wonder and fear. "My systems aren't just adapting to human biochemistry anymore, they're actively seeking it." "Seeking you?" "There has to be something we can do," James insisted. "Some way to prevent them from erasing your memories. The procedure isn't just about memories. It will reset my entire biochemical matrix to baseline nocturne parameters. Everything I feel, everything I've become." She trailed off, all three eyes fixed on their joined hands. "Then we'll find another way. Earth grants asylum to refugees. If you can prove you'd face persecution." "It's not that simple," Lyra interrupted. "My body contains proprietary nocturne biotechnology. They'd never allow it to remain outside their control." She touched his face with her free hand, leaving trails of light where her fingers passed. "Besides, any attempt to claim asylum would trigger an interstellar diplomatic crisis." James leaned into her touch, his skin tingling where they connected. "So we just give up? Let them erase everything?" "No," Lyra said firmly. "I've spent my life studying biological systems. There might be a way to encode these changes more deeply. Make them resistant to resequencing. But it would require resources I don't have access to." Before James could respond, an alert chimed from the main bar. He checked the display and swore softly. "Terra Prime executives are asking for you. By name." Lyra's skin went almost completely black. "This is bad. Terra Prime has been trying to reverse engineer nocturne biotechnology for years. If they've realized what's happening to me, we need to get you out of here." James peeked through the privacy screen. "There's a service exit through the kitchen. I can create a distraction." The main doors burst open, admitting a squad of nocturne security officers, their armor absorbing light like patches of deep space. Leading them was second observer Helix herself, her crystalline form now fully corporeal. "Researcher Lyra," Helix announced, her voice resonating through the bar. "You will return to the ship immediately for emergency decontamination." Lyra's grip on James's hand tightened. "They're here too soon. Something must have accelerated their timeline." Her skin pulsed with rapid patterns he'd never seen before. "James, I..." "Don't," he interrupted. "Don't say goodbye. We'll figure this out." For a moment, Lyra's eyes swirled with so many colors they seemed to contain entire galaxies. Then she pulled away, her professional mask sliding back into place. As she walked toward her waiting escorts, her skin gradually dimmed until she was once again the perfect picture of nocturne control. Only James had seen the small object she'd pressed into his hand, a data crystal that pulsed with the same patterns as her skin when she touched him. Looking down at it, he knew two things with absolute certainty: it contained the key to saving her, and he had less than a week to figure out how to use it. The Terra Prime executives watched the whole scene with poorly concealed interest, their corporate augments recording everything. As James slipped the crystal into his pocket, he realized the game had just become far more complicated, and much more dangerous. The data crystal pulsed softly in James's palm, its bioorganic surface warm to the touch. For 3 days, he'd been trying to decode its secrets, reaching out to every contact he'd made in his years of bartending. Now, in a dimly lit laboratory on the outskirts of New Singapore, he might finally have answers. Fascinating, Dr. Rhiannon Wade murmured, her cybernetic eyes scanning the crystal's output. It's not just data, it's a complete blueprint of her transformed biology. James leaned forward eagerly. Can you understand it? Partially. Rhiannon's augmented fingers danced through holographic displays. The nocturne biochemistry is beyond our current science, but these changes. She highlighted a series of molecular structures. These are purely human-influenced adaptations. She's literally rewriting her own genetic code in response to human pheromones. My pheromones, James corrected quietly. She said the changes were specific to me. Rhiannon shot him a knowing look. More than you realize. These adaptations aren't random, they're creating a permanent biochemical bond. If the collective succeeds in resequencing her, it won't just erase her memories. It could kill her. James felt his blood run cold. There has to be something we can do. Maybe. Rhiannon pulled up another display. She's left us instructions. Complex ones. She's developed a way to stabilize the changes, make them permanent and resistant to resequencing. But we'd need. Need what? Direct cellular contact. Extended exposure to your specific biochemical signature. And. Rhiannon hesitated, access to the collective's biotechnology. James's heart sank. The ship. We'd have to get onto their ship. Impossible, a new voice declared. They turned to see one of the Terra Prime executives from the bar, flanked by corporate security. But we might have an alternative proposition. James instinctively pocketed the crystal. This is a private facility. Mr. Morgan, the executive smiled without warmth, I'm Director Winters. We've been monitoring your situation with great interest. Terra Prime has spent years trying to understand nocturne biotechnology. Your friend's unique condition presents an unprecedented opportunity. She's not an opportunity, James growled. She's a person. Of course, Winters agreed smoothly. One we'd like to help. We have resources, Mr. Morgan. Including a shuttle capable of reaching the collective's ship. Rhiannon's cybernetic eyes narrowed. In exchange for samples, data, access to the resulting technology. Think of the possibilities, human-compatible versions of nocturne bioenhancements. The medical applications alone. You want to exploit her condition, James accused. We want to help you save her life, Winters countered. The collective will begin her resequencing in 3 days. You need us, Mr. Morgan. The question is, how far will you go to save her? James stared at the crystal in his hand, watching patterns that reminded him of Lyra's skin when she laughed. If, and I mean if, we did this, I have conditions. Name them. Full autonomy for Lyra. No forced testing. And she owns all rights to her unique biology. Winters considered for a moment. Agreed, with one caveat. Terra Prime gets first rights to negotiate any commercial applications she chooses to develop. Deal. James turned to Rhiannon. Can you complete her stabilization process in time? She nodded grimly. If everything goes perfectly. But James. She glanced at the Terra Prime security, this is incredibly dangerous. The collective doesn't take kindly to corporate espionage. They don't take kindly to anything, he replied. But they've given us no choice. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Terra Prime's resources proved extensive, providing everything from genetic stabilizers to falsified credentials. James memorized the layout of the Nocturne ship, practiced using their biotechnology interfaces, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Finally, he stood in the shuttle's airlock, wearing a stealth suit that supposedly masked his biochemical signature. The crystal pulsed against his chest, synchronized with his heartbeat. "Remember," Winters's voice crackled through his earpiece, "you'll have 30 minutes before their sensors detect the shuttle's masking field. Find her, complete the stabilization, and get out." "And if we're caught?" James asked. "Then we were never here, and you never existed." Comforting. James checked his equipment one last time. "What about the diplomatic fallout?" "Already handled. If this works, the collective will be too embarrassed by their loss of control to make an issue of it. If it doesn't." Winters paused meaningfully. "Well, let's make sure it works." The airlock cycled, and James stepped into the void. The Nocturne ship loomed above him, a perfect sphere of darkness against the stars. As his suit's thrusters carried him toward a maintenance hatch, he thought about everything that had brought him to this moment. 5 years of tending bar, serving drinks to beings from across the galaxy. One chance encounter with a scientist who saw human culture as primitive but was fascinated by it anyway. A series of chemical reactions that had somehow blossomed into something profound enough to risk everything for. As he reached the ship's hull, James smiled grimly. Humanity might be considered primitive by Nocturne standards, but they had one advantage: when humans fell in love, they didn't let anything stand in their way, not even the laws of biochemistry. The maintenance hatch accepted his stolen codes, and James slipped into the darkness of the Nocturne ship. Somewhere above him, Lyra was waiting, whether she knew it or not. It was time to prove that human persistence could overcome even the most advanced alien technology. He just hoped they'd both live long enough to enjoy their victory. The interior of the Nocturne ship was like navigating through liquid darkness. James's stealth suit barely registered on the bioorganic surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Following Rhiannon's uploaded map, he made his way toward the medical sector where Lyra was being held. The data crystal grew warmer against his chest with each step, as if responding to Lyra's proximity. He'd learned from Rhiannon that the crystal contained more than just biological data. It held everything Lyra had become, her entire transformed consciousness encoded in Nocturne biotechnology. A sudden shift in the corridor's lighting forced James to duck into a recessed alcove. 2 Nocturne guards glided past, their skin patterns indicating alert status. He caught fragments of their conversation. Accelerated schedule. First observer wants resequencing completed within 6 hours. James's heart raced. They were moving faster than expected. Once the resequencing began, there would be no going back. He checked his timer, 22 minutes remaining before the shuttle's masking field failed. The medical sector doors were locked with biorecognition protocols, but Terra Prime's countermeasures worked exactly as promised. Inside, James found himself in a chamber that looked more like an art installation than a medical facility. Crystalline structures grew from floor to ceiling, each one containing what appeared to be sleeping Nocturnes in various stages of treatment. He spotted Lyra immediately. Her containment crystal was larger than the others, surrounded by monitoring equipment. Her skin was almost completely dark, but occasional pulses of light still chased across its surface, patterns he recognized as matching his own biochemical signature. As he approached, her 3 eyes opened. "James," she whispered, her voice distorted by the crystal. "You shouldn't be here. They'll detect you." "Already did," a resonant voice announced. Second observer Helix stepped from behind a crystal column, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light. "Though I must admit, you lasted longer than expected for a primitive species." James raised his hands slowly, mind racing. "I can explain." "No need." Helix moved closer, studying him with evident curiosity. "We've been monitoring Lyra's transformation with great interest. Did you really think we wouldn't notice her encoding her consciousness into that crystal you carry?" "Then you know what the resequencing will do to her," James argued. It could kill her. It will save her, Helix corrected. These changes are unprecedented, dangerous. They threaten everything the collective has built. They threaten your control, James countered. Because they prove that your perfect, evolved society isn't as far beyond us primitives as you'd like to believe. Lyra's crystal pulsed with sudden light. He's right, she declared, her voice stronger. My transformation isn't a degradation, it's evolution. I've discovered emotions, connections, possibilities that our society abandoned in its pursuit of perfection. And look where it's led, Helix gestured around the chamber. To theft, deception, and now attempted rescue by a primitive species. No, Lyra's skin blazed with patterns more complex than James had ever seen. It's led to love. Real, messy, impossible love that defies your precious logic. And I choose it. I choose him. The crystal containing her began to crack, hairline fracture spreading across its surface. Helix stepped back in alarm. Impossible. No nocturne can break containment through sheer will. I'm not just nocturne anymore, Lyra declared as the crystal shattered. She stepped out, her skin radiating light in patterns that matched the pulse of James's crystal. I'm something new. James rushed to her side, and the moment they touched, both their bodies began to glow. The crystal against his chest grew hot, then seemed to melt, its contents flowing into both of them. Lyra gasped as the stabilizing sequence Rhiannon had prepared merged with her transformed biology. What have you done? Helix demanded, backing away from their shared radiance. Prove that evolution doesn't always mean leaving things behind, Lyra answered. She turned to James, all three eyes swirling with joy. Sometimes it means embracing something new. Alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Your shuttle's masking field has failed, Helix announced. Security teams are already responding. You'll never escape. James grinned. Want to bet? He activated his emergency beacon, and the chamber filled with shimmering light as Terra Prime's matter transporters locked onto them. Wait, Helix called as they began to dematerialize. The implications of this transformation, the potential applications. Feel free to negotiate, Lyra replied with a very human smile. I retain full rights to my biology. Terra Prime has already agreed to my terms. They rematerialized in Terra Prime's laboratory, where Rhiannon and Director Winters waited anxiously. The moment they were solid, Lyra pulled James into a kiss that sent cascades of light rippling across both their bodies. It worked, Rhiannon announced, checking her readings. The stabilization is complete. Her transformed biology is permanent, and it's spreading to you, James. You're both becoming something entirely new. The collective will protest, Winters warned, though he couldn't hide his satisfaction. This will cause quite a diplomatic stir. Let them protest, Lyra said, her skin glowing with happiness. They've just witnessed the next step in nocturne evolution, a partnership with the very species they dismissed as primitive. Their precious logic won't let them ignore the implications. James touched her cheek, watching light follow his fingers. So what happens now? Now. Lyra's eyes swirled with mischief. Now we return to where it all began. I believe I still have much to learn about human social customs. Particularly. She kissed him again, the romantic ones. 1 year later, the Starlight Lounge had become the most popular bar in the galaxy. Beings from every known species came to watch its famous bartending duo, the human who glowed with alien light and the nocturne whose laugh filled the room with cascading patterns of joy. Their unique biology, studied under carefully negotiated terms with both Terra Prime and the Collective, led to breakthroughs in xenobiology and medicine. But more importantly, their story became a symbol of hope, proof that love truly could transcend the barriers between species, even rewriting the very chemistry of existence in its pursuit of connection. And every night, when James mixed the drink that started it all, Lyra's skin would pulse with patterns that matched his heartbeat, reminding them both that sometimes the most profound scientific discoveries begin with something as simple as a bartender trying to impress a girl from the stars.